I sat in that chair by the window for hours, watching the same tree sway back and forth, like it was the only thing left in my world that hadn't changed. They walked past me like I was invisible, like I was a piece of old furniture that had outlived its purpose. I heard laughter from the hallway, a whisper followed by a giggle. I wasn't supposed to hear, but I did. She doesn't even realize how much trouble she causes, that voice. It belonged to my daughter-in-law, the one who once hugged me so tightly when I helped raise her newborn son. Now she says I'm a burden. I gave this family everything. My strength, my years, my love. I wiped noses, paid bills, missed doctor's appointments to babysit. I was the backbone when they couldn't stand. And now, I'm in the way. Now, I'm too much. Now, they talk about me like I can't hear, like I'm not even in the room. But I hear, and worse I feel. Every word clings to me like a stain I can't scrub out. The house feels colder lately, not because of the temperature, but because of the silence. The kind of silence that creeps into your bones. I used to fill rooms with laughter. My cooking brought everyone to the table. Now, they eat without me. They plan without me. They live around me like I'm just there. One morning, I reached for my own teacup and found it empty. No one had thought of me. Again, I turned toward the window, the same tree swaying like a tired friend. That's when I heard the knock on my door, not loud, not harsh, but gentle. And then his voice. My grandson. "Grandma," he whispered. "Are you awake?" I turned slowly, surprised. No one knocks anymore. They just barge in, take what they want, and leave. He stepped into the room, his face tight, his hands shaking. "I know," he said. Two words that cracked me open. "I know what they've been saying. I've heard it, and I've seen how they treat you." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My lips trembled, but no sound came. Someone saw me, not just the shell I've become, but me, the woman who still remembers how to dance. The woman who once ran a business and stood tall beside her husband. The woman who gave everything for a family that forgot. "I saw how they laughed after you left the kitchen," he continued. "I heard them say you don't matter anymore. But you do, Grandma. To me, you do." And just like that, I wasn't alone. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't going crazy. My heart had been whispering that I was being erased, and now he had said it out loud. If you've ever felt like you were being pushed to the edges of your own life, like your story was still being written but no one cared to read it, you're not alone. There is power in being seen. There is power in having just one person stand beside you and say, "You matter." If this story has already moved something inside you, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Every click helps this message reach someone else who needs to be reminded of their worth. And now I ask you, from the depth of your own experience, have you ever felt invisible in a place you helped build? Tell me in the comments. Your voice deserves to be heard. My name is Evelyn. I am 76 years old, and I wasn't always this quiet. I used to walk with a straight back, a voice full of conviction, and hands that built more than a home, they built a legacy. I was a teacher for over 3 decades. My students still write me letters. I raised 2 boys, buried 1 husband, and managed a household that never lacked warmth. I hosted birthdays with cakes I baked myself, fixed things around the house better than any handyman, and kept our family from falling apart more times than they ever knew. I wasn't someone who just got old. I was someone who lived fully. And I still do, even if no one else sees it. When my husband passed, everything shifted. The silence after his last breath was deafening. The walls of our house felt colder. The floor creaked differently. The routines we built were no longer mine to keep. After weeks of hesitation, my son Thomas invited me to live with him and his wife, Rachel. He said it would be easier, that I shouldn't be alone, that they wanted me there. I believed him. I packed my memories into boxes, my wedding photos, the small figurines he used to buy me every year, my books with handwritten notes in the margins, and the blanket he gave me on our 25th anniversary. I brought them with me to a house that never truly opened its doors to me. At first, everything felt polite. Rachel smiled. Thomas hugged me. The guest room was clean and even had fresh flowers. They told me not to worry about anything. "We'll take care of you now," they said. But soon, things shifted. My tea didn't come hot anymore. Sometimes, it didn't come at all. When I tried to cook, Rachel said the kitchen was too crowded. When I offered to help fold laundry, Thomas said, "You should just rest." Mom, they stopped asking for my opinion about anything from what we should eat to where we should spend holidays. It was like being demoted in your own life. Once, I mentioned wanting to visit a friend. Rachel responded, "That might be too much for you." I stared at her, wondering what gave her the right to decide how much I could handle. I've handled more in a week of my life than she has in years. I used to go out in the mornings to take a walk. Fresh air, birdsong, sunshine. I returned one day to find the gate locked. They said it was for security. My independence, bit by bit, was being filed away like an expired document. I became someone they scheduled around, not someone they spent time with. My grandson, Noah, would visit now and then. His laughter was the only music I still heard in that house. When he was around, I felt like myself again. We'd play cards, and he'd ask me about my childhood. He remembered my stories. But when he wasn't there, the silence came back, and with it, the slow erosion of who I used to be. I live in a small room at the back of the house now. They say it's for my comfort, but it feels more like a boundary, a place to keep me contained, out of the way. I watch family dinners from afar. I hear them laugh in the living room, but I'm never asked to join. They leave me leftovers on a plate by the microwave. I used to be the heart of my family. Now I'm just the echo. If you've ever built a life only to feel like a guest in your own story, I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you do when the people you raised no longer see you? It started with the little things, small details most people wouldn't notice. A card that suddenly stopped working. My phone, which they claimed had too many apps and was too complicated for someone like me, mysteriously vanished from the table one afternoon. They told me it was for my own good, that people my age didn't need to be burdened with modern distractions. They said they were protecting me, but I didn't feel safe. I felt erased. At first, I didn't argue. I didn't want to be a bother. I told myself they were trying to help, that maybe I was the one being too sensitive. But the silence began to grow. The once lively kitchen where I used to bake every Sunday for my grandson became a ghost town. Meals were no longer shared at the table. They were left outside my door in cold, quiet containers, sometimes untouched for hours. No one asked if I'd eaten. No one waited to see if I liked it. I was becoming a routine, a responsibility to be ticked off a list, like taking out the trash or watering the plants. There were days when my medications were forgotten entirely. I would remind them gently at first, then more urgently. Still, the bottles sat unopened. My body started to ache in places it hadn't before, not from age, but from neglect. I once went 2 days without my blood pressure pills. I didn't want to accuse them. I told myself maybe they were busy, maybe they forgot, but deep down, a voice whispered, "They don't care." And then came the words, the ones that don't leave bruises on your skin, but mark your soul forever. I heard them from behind the walls, through cracked doors, from the corners of rooms where I wasn't supposed to be listening. She's lived long enough. It's not like she knows what's going on anymore, God. She just sits there like a statue. They laughed after saying these things. Laughed, as if mocking my existence was entertainment. As if every year I'd given, every sacrifice I'd made, every dream I'd buried for them meant nothing. The worst part, it came from people I once held as infants. People I once comforted through nightmares and heartbreak. I gave them pieces of me, and now, they picked me apart with jokes and indifference. I tried to speak up once, just once. I asked why they had taken my phone. My daughter-in-law looked at me, bored, and said, "Because you were calling random numbers. You don't even remember, do you?" I remembered. I was trying to call my friend Evelyn. We used to chat every Wednesday, but they deleted her number. One evening, I stood in the hallway, listening, not eavesdropping, just trying to feel close to a family that used to love me. I heard them planning a vacation. I was never mentioned. Not once. No, should we bring mom? No, what will she do while we're away? Just laughter, and the sound of a door closing. That night, something broke in me. Not loudly. Not like glass crashing or a scream in the dark. It was quiet, like the sound of paper tearing. It was the sound of realizing you've become invisible to the people you raised. So I started writing. In a small notebook I hid beneath my pillow, I wrote it all. The missed pills, the cold meals, the silence, the jokes, the shame. Each word was a tear I couldn't cry out loud. I filled pages with the truth no one wanted to hear. Not to blame, not to punish, but because I had to exist somewhere. If not in their eyes, at least on paper. There were nights I clutched that diary like a lifeline. It reminded me I wasn't crazy, that I still remembered who I was. That once upon a time, I was loved. That once upon a time, my presence meant something. I wrote about the day I got this house, about how proud my husband was when we crossed the threshold, about the wallpaper we chose together, the way he insisted on putting the nail in crooked because he said perfection was boring. I wrote about my grandson, about how he used to run into my arms after school, how his little hands would tug at my skirt until I told him a story. I wondered if he remembered. I wondered if I still lived in his heart the way he lived in mine. I wrote, too, about the loneliness. Not the kind people talk about in poems or movies, but the kind that sits beside you when the lights go out. The kind that whispers, "No one's coming for you," the kind that makes you doubt your worth. And yet, every time I finished a page, I felt stronger, not because things were better, but because the truth, once written, cannot be denied. In that little notebook, I still existed. In those shaky lines, I was still real, still here. I held onto hope like a candle in the dark. I prayed someone would see me, not out of pity, but out of love. I wanted to be seen again, heard again, not as a burden, but as a human being, a mother, a grandmother, a woman who had lived, who had loved, who had mattered. And then one day, I noticed something, a flicker of change, a pair of eyes, watching me, not with irritation, but with concern. A soft knock on my door. Not to deliver a tray, but to ask how I was feeling. It wasn't from my son. It wasn't from his wife. It was from the only soul in that house who still saw me, my grandson. He didn't say much at first, just sat beside me in silence. But his presence spoke louder than any word. He reached under the pillow one day and pulled out the notebook. I froze. My heart raced. I was terrified he would laugh, that he'd join the others in mocking me, but he didn't laugh. He read, page after page, his hands trembling, his eyes filling with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Tears. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated or made invisible by those closest to you, only to be surprised by someone who truly saw your worth? Share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters more than you think. At first, he didn't say much. He would come home from school, drop his bag by the door, and walk past me like the rest of them. But there was something different in his glance, hesitation, maybe, or curiosity. He wasn't cold like the others, just silent, observing. He started noticing the little things, how my meals were always served last, cold, and carelessly placed on a tray by the door like I was an inmate. How the TV remote I once used freely was suddenly placed out of my reach. How I barely left my room unless someone told me to. My grandson, at only 15, was starting to see the cracks in the perfect family portrait they painted to the world. He watched me try to smile at dinner while my son laughed loudly at his wife's jokes about how long old people hang around. He heard the way she mocked my slowness when I dropped a spoon or forgot a word. He watched the others chuckle while I sat in silence, staring at my plate, pretending not to feel the sting. Then one evening, he passed by my room while I was crying softly into my pillow. I didn't know he was there. I thought I was alone, but he lingered, frozen outside the door, unsure whether to knock or run away. The next morning, he left a drawing on my nightstand. A little boy holding his grandmother's hand. No note, no explanation, just the drawing. And that's when I knew he saw me. Days later, I made a mistake. I left the diary I'd been writing tucked just a little too loose beneath my pillow. It had become my only companion, filled with every hurtful moment, every cruel word, every time I was told I was too much. That night, while I was taking a nap, he came into my room, looking for his phone charger, and there it was, the small, leather-bound book, sticking out just enough to catch his eye. He pulled it out slowly, almost reverently, as if instinctively knowing it wasn't just paper. He sat at the edge of the bed and began to read. At first, just a few lines, then a few pages. Then he couldn't stop. He read about the morning they unplugged my TV because they said I wasted electricity, the day they took my phone, saying I had no one to talk to, the night they left me locked out of my own bedroom, saying I was confused and had walked into the wrong room, and the morning I woke up on the sofa, my back aching, while my own son told a visitor she likes sleeping there, says it reminds her of her youth. Tears ran down his cheeks. He pressed the book to his chest and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Grandma." That night, he didn't sleep. He waited until everyone was in bed, then came to my room and sat beside me. He whispered, "I know everything. I read it all, and I believe you." I opened my eyes slowly, terrified. For months, I had been gaslighted, ignored, treated like I was imagining things. But now, my grandson, my own flesh and blood, was telling me he saw it too. He held my hand, firm, unshaking. "They don't see you," he said, "but I do, and I'm going to help you. You don't deserve this." In that moment, the world cracked open. A sliver of light cut through the thick fog I had been living in. My tears didn't come from pain this time. They came from the hope I thought had died. From that day forward, he began to watch more closely. He listened to the way they spoke to me. He noticed the way they rolled their eyes, ignored my words, shut me down when I tried to speak. But this time, he didn't just observe, he started writing too. He documented every interaction, every whisper, every act of cruelty. When they laughed at me behind closed doors, he was nearby, recording. When they left me alone on holidays, he noted the time. When they told me I was lucky to even have a roof over my head, he jotted it down. My grandson, this young boy who had every reason to stay quiet, to keep his head down, chose to stand up. And that's when everything started to change. Have you ever felt unseen in your own family? Like the people you loved most couldn't even recognize your worth anymore? Tell me below, because I know I'm not alone. And maybe neither are you. The day everything changed didn't arrive with thunder or lightning. It was quiet, too quiet, but in the silence, something powerful was building, a truth ready to explode. My grandson, who had been silently watching everything, collecting proof, and fighting an invisible war in my name, decided it was time to act. I remember the way he looked at me that morning, eyes full of determination, carrying a small folder under his arm. It was the folder that held my freedom. I didn't know yet, but he had gone further than I imagined. He had documented it all. The missed meals left cold on the floor like offerings no one cared about. Photos of my locked bedroom door with the key missing from its usual place. Voice recordings of my son and daughter-in-law whispering cruel things when they thought I was asleep. She doesn't even remember anything anymore. Why waste money feeding a ghost? That voice, her voice burned itself into every page of his evidence. And he didn't stop there. He'd spoken with one of his teachers at school, a woman who always said, "If something's wrong at home, don't keep it quiet." He trusted her. He showed her the photos, the voice notes, even my diary that he had found hidden under the pillow one night when he kissed me goodnight. She was horrified. She made calls, first to the school counselor, then to a legal aid clinic, and finally to someone who could really help, a social worker trained to deal with elder abuse. They didn't waste time. They read every word my grandson had carefully compiled and knew that it wasn't just neglect. It was cruelty, psychological abuse. That same week, I was sitting in the garden, pretending to enjoy the breeze, when I saw two police cars park quietly in front of the house. My heart raced. My grandson walked out to meet them like a young man twice his age, serious and focused. He nodded. They followed him inside. My son yelled when he saw the uniforms. "What's going on? This is a mistake." My daughter-in-law tried to smile, as if charm could erase the bruises on my spirit, but the officers weren't confused. They knew exactly what they were there for. One of them gently approached me and asked if I was all right. I nodded, stunned, barely breathing. "We're here to help, ma'am. Your grandson told us everything." For a moment, I couldn't move. I wasn't used to being believed. I wasn't used to being seen. They led me out of that house with dignity. No handcuffs, no shouting, just the quiet gravity of justice. Finally arriving, my grandson never left my side. He held my hand the entire time, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: safety. As we stepped outside, I heard my son yelling behind us, trying to explain. "She's old. She forgets things. This isn't what it looks like." My daughter-in-law muttered something about lies and manipulation, still clinging to her performance like it could save her. But my grandson didn't let them have the last word. He turned around, looked straight at them, and said loud enough for the neighbors and the officers to hear, "You didn't see her." But I did, and I won't stay silent. That sentence echoed in the street like a verdict, and I knew in that moment that I was no longer alone. He had stood up, not just for me but for every grandparent who had ever been cast aside like an old photograph in a dusty drawer. Now I ask you, how many people out there are watching their loved ones fade in silence, afraid to speak, afraid to act? And how many more would have the courage my grandson had to turn silence into justice? Tell me in the comments, have you ever seen someone suffer in silence and wanted to make a difference? Because sometimes, one voice is all it takes to break generations of silence. The sun filtered softly through the lace curtains of my new little home, casting gentle shadows on the wooden floor. For the first time in years, I woke up without fear, without shame, and without the weight of invisible chains around my soul. The air smelled of lavender and fresh coffee. My grandson had already been here. He never missed a morning. Not since that day. Not since he stood between me and the people who forgot who I was. My new house wasn't big. It didn't have chandeliers or imported tiles. But it was mine. It had silence when I needed it, and the laughter of birds instead of cold whispers behind closed doors. I had chosen every curtain, every plant, every photo frame. No one erased my memories here. No one rolled their eyes when I spoke. This house respected me because I built it with dignity. The garden was the first thing I worked on. The soil felt alive in my hands, and every seed I planted was like a prayer. My grandson, Marcus, brought the tools, the gloves, and the seedlings. But most importantly, he brought his heart. He would kneel beside me, his jeans dirtied by the earth, and ask, "What should we plant next, Grandma?" He never rushed me. He never questioned my pace. He listened. He truly listened. Each afternoon, we sat on the porch with a book in hand and a cup of coffee. Sometimes we read out loud. Sometimes we didn't need words at all. The silence between us was healing. I didn't need to prove my worth. I didn't need to ask for love. It was there in every small gesture, every shared smile, every time he said, "I'm proud of you, Grandma." There were nights I still cried. Healing doesn't come in a straight line. But Marcus was always there, with a blanket, with tea, with silence when I needed it most. He reminded me of the woman I used to be, the woman who built a home with her hands, who fought for a better future, who raised a family with every fiber of her being. He never let me forget that version of myself, and little by little, I started to see her again in the mirror. One evening, we sat under the stars in the backyard. He brought out an old photo album I thought was lost. Inside, I saw myself laughing, dancing, holding my babies. And I wept, not because of what I lost but because someone still remembered. Someone still saw me, not as a burden, not as background noise, but as a person, as a woman, as his grandmother. I started writing again, not just in a journal hidden beneath a pillow but openly, on clean pages, on a desk I chose, with ink that didn't tremble with fear. I wrote my story, my truth, and Marcus encouraged me to share it not for pity, but for power, because silence had taken too much from me already. It was time to speak. We planted lilies that spring, he told me. They meant renewal. I told him they reminded me of peace. On the day the first bloom opened, he smiled and said, "That one's for you, because you're blooming again too." And he was right. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it no longer ruled me. I had reclaimed my voice, my space, my life. The last thing we planted that day was a tree, a strong one, roots deep, branches wide. I told Marcus, "This one will grow with you. Every year, it'll remind you of what we fought for, what we won back." He hugged me tight, and for the first time in forever, I didn't feel fragile, I felt whole. I was no longer the shadow in the hallway, the whisper behind a door, the old woman too quiet to matter. I was alive again, and all it took was one heart willing to see me, one voice willing to speak up, one grandson brave enough to stand. What about you? Do you think true love, real, courageous love, can rescue someone from silence? Tell me in the comments who stood up for you when the world turned away. Sometimes, life brings us deceptions in the form of silence. And for those of us who have given everything, our time, our strength, our love, it is especially painful to look around one day and realize that no one sees us anymore. We become invisible, not because we faded, but because they stopped looking. But even in those moments of abandonment, even when the walls seem to close in and the world pretends not to hear our cries, there is still hope. There is always one heart that listens, one soul that still sees, one voice that dares to speak up. What happened in that house wasn't just about neglect. It was about identity, about erasure, about a woman who had walked through fire her whole life, only to be treated as if she no longer mattered. But God does not forget the faithful, and He doesn't remain silent in the face of injustice. Sometimes, His answer comes not in thunder or lightning, but in a quiet voice, in the eyes of a grandchild, in the courage of one who refuses to let evil continue. There's something powerful in being seen again, truly seen, not as a chore, not as a burden, but as someone with a story, with value, with a beating heart that still deserves love. That transformation doesn't come from revenge. It comes from redemption. And redemption always begins when truth is spoken aloud. We often think miracles are loud, but sometimes, a miracle is as simple as a boy picking up a camera, documenting what others try to hide. A boy knocking on the door of someone who still believes in justice. A boy sitting beside his grandmother and reminding her, "You're still here. You're still you, and I won't let them take that from you." And maybe that's the greatest act of love, to see someone's pain, not turn away, and say, "I will stand for you." That is what faith looks like in action. That is what healing sounds like. And that is what freedom feels like when it returns after being locked away in silence. If you're listening to this story and something inside you stirs, it's because part of you knows what it's like to be silenced, to be underestimated, to be cast aside when you have so much more to give. But let this be a reminder: your voice matters, your truth matters, your life, no matter your age, your past, your mistakes, still carries weight. And those who try to erase you only fear what they can't control, your strength. So plant your roots again, speak your truth again, laugh again, write again, and know that the ones who matter will find you, just like He found her. Because real love doesn't ignore pain. It walks into it, holds your hand, and walks you out of the darkness, step by step, breath by breath, day by day. And now I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like your voice was taken from you only to find it again through someone's love, or through your own strength? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one, because this channel is not just about storytelling, it's about healing together. If this story moved you, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's not just support, it's a declaration that stories like this matter, that voices like hers still need to be heard. And stay with us, because in the next video, we'll uncover another untold truth, a story where a forgotten mother uncovers a secret that changes everything. You won't believe what she discovers, and who finally stands by her side. Because here, we don't stay silent. We speak love, we fight injustice, and we remember that no one should ever feel invisible, not while we still have a voice.